The actual number of podcasts that are active are only 500,000.
There are a lot of stories which are there in the bank.
I'm sitting here because I'm a masochist. I just like giving myself pain.
First step has to be, this is my content, this is how I'm defining it, this is my audience, and this is what I'm going to stick to for the foreseeable future.
Gautam, there are lots of people who want to start their first podcast. And the question I always get asked is, it's an ocean of podcasts out there. How does one get to be number one on a search engine? How does one get onto the landing page of Spotify, Amazon Music? Because, rumor has it, you only get discovered if you're on the landing page, unless you go and actively search for stuff. So talk us through that piece.
Okay, so can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. So first, thanks for the question. And second, I've got a big bone to pick with Yatin because he chose to sequence the conversations in such a way where you put comedians on stage and very handsome and good-looking people on stage right before
You're sitting
putting
where
us
Cyrus
on
was
stage.
sitting.
I'm sitting here because I'm a masochist. I just like giving myself pain. So essentially, how many people here are podcasters themselves? Okay, excellent. So a fair few people. How many people of you use Hubhopper? The ones that don't, please leave. No, I'm joking. So I'll actually start by telling you guys what a special position you're in. Let me actually start with that. And then I'll tell you certain tips and tricks that you can use. So there are a few things that was stated earlier. It was stated that there are 5 million podcasts, which is a true statement. But there are actually 5 million podcasts that have been created since the dawn of podcasting. The actual number of podcasts that are active are only 500,000. So you have more people listening to podcasts than ever before, but the competition is not as much as you think it is, number one. Number two is there are a few variables that make podcasting do well in any market. Few of these variables are wherever there's high commuting time, podcast does well. Wherever people spend a large amount of time at home, podcasting does well. Wherever data is cheap, podcasting does well. And wherever a large number of languages are spoken in one location, podcasting does well. This is pan-geography. Always this is essentially the case. Now, ironically enough, when it comes to commuting time, India's second in the world in terms of the amount of time people spend commuting. In terms of time spent at home, we're third in the world. In terms of number of languages, I don't need to highlight the number of languages that are spoken in India and what a linguistically rich country we are. And in terms of data, we are currently the third cheapest data country on earth. So it's no surprise that even though podcasting in the new nomenclature that it has come into India hit our shores only about 5-6 years ago, we've already become the third largest consumption market on earth. This is something whenever I'm going and speaking at a podcast movement or the podcast show or any university or anything like that, why people want to hear about the India story is because this data confuses people. Podcasting just reached India. India is already the third largest consumption market. In platforms like Amazon Music, India is already the second largest consumption market pan-global. So you're sitting in a very good place. Now, how do you actually make sure that if you're starting, you get your podcast to become very successful? So few things are when you're creating your show, figure out who your audience is and what your why is. So understand what the transaction you have with that audience member. They're giving you 20 minutes of their time. What are you giving them back in return? This is a phenomenal way to think when you're coming up with a podcast, and a way to actually make sure that you don't pod fade is make sure before starting a podcast, write at least 50 potential episode titles so that you always have ideas that you can carry on as you go forward with. Always speak directly at your listener and always thank them through the process of your podcast. Keep your podcast about 20 minutes long. Structure your podcast in a way where you have one dominant CTA and one secondary CTA. Your dominant CTA should always be to take the listeners that you're getting in your podcast, whichever episode people are listening in, you want to make sure that they come back for the next episode. So it should be something like a newsletter so that they can come back and listen in again. when you're thinking about something like your show notes, remember show notes aren't made for the listener. Show notes are actually made for the computer. All right? So make sure that the show notes that you guys are creating have all the keywords that basically allow the platforms to ingest them in the best way possible. There was a big conversation between video versus audio. I'm the proponent of both. Think about podcasting as a funnel. You should always have a video strategy, but video should be in your marketing strategy. And the retention and the loyalty should be in your audio strategy. So when you launch your podcast in your market launch, you should take out short clips of video that essentially go out there, and make sure that when you want people to listen to the longer forms, they're coming and listening on audio and coming back. The final thing that I'll do and essentially state to you is make sure that you leverage all the platforms that somebody can listen to your podcast on. So there are platforms like your Hangamas, there are platforms like your Daily Hunts. They all exist. A lot of your podcasts aren't on them. Make sure you're on every platform where your podcast can exist. So I'll stop here, but just a few things that I hope are useful tidbits for you guys as we sort of move along.
Fantastic. Great glossary of items. Thank you for that applause. How many of you have heard Leading Voices? Leading Voices is basically a podcast series by Federal Bank, something that has really been driven by Murthy. Well, if you haven't, please go and check it out tonight after the session, the conclave as well as the awards. Now, Leading Voices is where they uncover the secret source of enterprise growth. Now, you could argue and turn around and say, my God, there's so many CEO business podcasts around. How do you market this to make it stand out? So my question to you, Murthy, is just that. How did you uncover the secret source of marketing Leading Voices?
So there is a bit of a background to Leading Voices. When I joined the bank, I was the first CMO they hired over a 94-year history of the bank. They never had a CMO. And one of the reasons why they hired me is because I understand 8 languages and I can speak about 5 of them. So I'm a culture foodie. So I think that was my go-to reason why they hired me. Now, when I joined the bank, one of the things that I did was that I went out and met a lot of folks across the bank, and we are about 1,500 branches across the country. And one thing which I realized about us as a bank, and we are the 6th largest bank in the country, is that there are a lot of stories which are there in the bank, okay? It's like having a good Mallu friend. We come from Kerala, the branches, the bank was originated there, but now we are across the country. And there were a lot of stories. Having met about 872 people, I realized that we have a very, very deep franchise. We have 3rd generation customers who are there with us. People want to come to the bank branch and they know so-and-so. And even with the colleagues, there are people who will say, oh, I joined in the 1997 batch or meri posting wahan pe hui thi, fir wahan se hum log yahan aaye the. So this was a whole backdrop to it. And Ogilvy was our agency. जैसे हरिश का एक वक्त होता है, तो हर campaign का भी एक वक्त होता है. And Ogilvy had done this presentation to us about 2 years back before I had joined. And they had coined this phrase, रिश्ता आपसे है, सिर्फ ऐप से नहीं. And सिर्फ is a very important operating word, because if I say रिश्ता आपसे है, ऐप से नहीं, then it means that as a bank I don't have a mobile banking app, or I don't have a website, I don't have a bot and stuff. So सिर्फ was a very important word. Now this line is so relevant across industries. If I was this hotel, I could have said the same thing to you, रिश्ता आपसे है, सिर्फ ऐप से नहीं, okay? If I'm an airline, I can say the same thing to you, that I have an app, but the interpersonal touch is what really matters. Because the idea was so big, it could transcend across industries, which is where I thought that if a CEO is running a company, he or she will always want to speak about the culture of the company, will want to speak about the people of the company, will want to speak about AI and how it is building efficiencies. And I thought it was a great pivot for anybody to come and speak about how he or she is building a great organization which is powered by technology, which is sirf aap wala part of Rishta, and is being actually driven by people. If I didn't have this idea, then the podcast would not have happened.
Incredible. I love that you're a linguist. That's wonderful. Mitesh, like I mentioned at the top, I think one of the unique things that he brings to this panel is the fact that White Rivers Media actually incubated a lab, which is a Gen Z lab, and it's research-based. So, the reason for having you on this panel is really to give us that vital pivot on what kind of research is available on Gen Z listenership, how many of them are listening, and in particular, what can brands, agencies do to market to Gen Z, market their podcast to Gen Z?
So I think I'll start off first by giving a shout out to Toyo. I've been very fortunate to actually be knowing the lead sponsor, and I would request all the podcasters and people in the music industry to kind of catch up with them. I think they have a vision, and it's got to be
I'd also
very
like to interrupt. Shurajit Chanda is there.
Yeah.
He's from Toyo. Shurajit,
And he's got an amazing vision, so I wish you all
thank
the
you.
luck.
Thank you for being such a friend to the Fever, the HT Smartcast, the Radio 1 network. And I know that you're deeply passionate about podcasting and radio programming because you've been on my show. And immense gratitude. Continue.
Right. So, I think when you ask about the data, I mean, numerical data are there, right? There are multiple publications, including Spotify and other ones have published their data. I think what we've deep dived across in Capital Z, which is our research arm, is to understand that what is going to make the podcast work for Gen Z, as an audience, right? So we came across something which is like your current Indian Gen Z, and I'm not talking about the global Gen Z. The Indian Gen Z looks at podcasts from a social compass lens, right? I want to understand the culture. I want to understand what's happening around me. There's also a whole piece about the underbelly of education, right? There are hundreds of things which are not taught in our schools, but I want to know that. You also look at post-Shark Tank, season 1, right? I want to know these entrepreneurs more. I want to see what is happening in their lives, right? And you've seen that then, WTF or barbershops, such podcasts also came through and everything. So I think as a marketer and as a podcaster, first thing first is to understand what is it that I'm giving across to Gen Z, because they want more varied content to come through. They really want access to all of you podcasters. Where we've seen success when it comes to marketing of podcasts is the access to the podcasters. There's a podcast called Having Said That, right? So they do chats, they have a BTS account and all the other things. So that makes all the difference. I think, can I reach across to these people? Can I talk to them? I think panel before us told how people would share, the things that they want to on those DMs. So when we look at from a marketing narrative to Gen Z, I think we've always structured in understanding that please go and listen to what they want, tailor it, make it for them, make yourself a lot more available to them, right? I think those things are making a lot of difference. And also, obviously, I mean, we have people who would know better, but what are the kind of trends that are, or the categories that are working? Like, still in India, mythology is going to be one of the top category that is out there. And it is coming through a lot of Spotify Gen Z accounts, but the mythology is being played. You've got true crime that is being out there, right? You've got now the Gen Z podcast, so there's a gamer called MythPat, and he does his podcast, and that's something being received quite well right now. So it's very important to understand that what is being consumed, and even on a episode-to-episode level, could you tailor-make it, is what I believe from a content creation narrative. From a marketing narrative, I think as an agency, as a research arm, it's always keeping your ears on the ground, going back to the customers or the listeners and continuously talking to them, bringing that data, putting back into the production. I think that has worked best for us at this point of time.
He mentioned Shark Tank, and I think that's spectacular that he did, because the reason Shark Tank went viral the last couple of seasons is because of White Rivers and Mitesh and what they do. I thought it was just phenomenal, the way they made it a household term. And really, it'll become a case study if it hasn't already at most B schools. So thank you for that, Mitesh. Aditya, you heard the self-proclaimed good-looking panel say this, where Nana, one of the panelists, said, oh my God, I've got to do this on video as well as audio. And we're seeing that all the time. We're seeing creators straddling live events, podcasts, radio, YouTube. There's an obvious question. I mean, how does one make one's content suitable for omni-channel distribution? And how does one market it? I mean, it seems like you're getting into some dangerous potpourri here, and you've got to think it out.
So thanks. I think step one is focus on the content. What you just described, the omni-channel approach, which will include everything over a period of time, is where you're building a brand. But the first step is to define your content, find your audience. Once you've built that, all of the other offshoots will definitely start to happen. Not every channel will work for every piece of content or every kind of creator. So find what works for you. Not everyone needs to do a meet and greet. Not everyone needs to figure out an event strategy. Audio versus video, I really don't think that should be a conversation anymore. It's just do it. Again, whether you should have a full-blown video show versus whether you should do it only as a promotional tool, depends on your content, depends on your audience. Both of them are hard mediums to break through for a new creator. Just the volume of content out there, the amount of content being put out every day, you have to give it time. I think Naina said it on the earlier panel that keep at it. There is no shortcut to that. You will have a breakthrough moment, but that breakthrough, it's the old saying that overnight success takes a long time. It's just the same thing that applies here. So give it time, stay consistent, but omni-channel must include video, must include audio, dabble with community building. If that in the early stages is your outset, you have a far better chance at success. Commercial success will come eventually. Honest answer, don't know when, how long. There's no formula to say you will get a lot of money in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. But you have to stay at it. So audio plus video, a little bit of community building, start to know your audience, see how you can connect with them. Is video the way to go there? Is a small group meetup? There are still tweet-ups that happen. I don't know if any of you attend them, like 90s kids doing
They
tweet-ups.
do happen.
Yeah, and that's still, and they're all bound by one interest, which is exactly what a podcast is. So that has to be your strategy. It has to be a multi-channel outlet. It's not just about having your podcast on 20 different platforms. You should also pay attention to that, by the way. Where am I getting the most audience from? Understand your analytics. Geographically, where are they? Ask yourself a question, do I need to have this in another language? Is there an opportunity there? So there is a lot of analysis, but the first step has to be, this is my content, this is how I'm defining it, this is my audience, and this is what I'm going to stick to for the foreseeable future. Everything else comes much later once you've got a decent sample size to say, hey, this is what my audience looks like.
The guys like my friend Amit Doshi here, guys like Aditya Kuber, people listen to their clear, concise, precise thoughts, and they say, wow, where did this come from? And it takes thousands and thousands of hours of podcasting for guys to reach this level of insight. And I have to say this about Aditya. He's constantly, as much as about Doshi, they're constantly thinking out of the box. In the very early days of podcasting, where everybody was only thinking of either business podcasting or chat shows or Bollywood podcasts, Aditya calls me and Ashwin, who's his partner here, say, can we do a podcast on handlooms which are inspired from paintings, from Madhubani art, worldly paintings? And I said, man, is this going to work? And I tell you, a few years down the line, the number of compliments, I went because I believed in Aditya, I believed in Ashwin and the Idea Brew team. And I said, if you believe this is going to work, let me give it a shot. The number of compliments we get for that far supersedes any Bollywood chat show. Nothing against people who do that format. So thank you very much for that, Aditya. Gautam, regional language podcasts. I'm so glad you brought it up right at the top. They're on the up. What is the advice you'd like to give to people who want to market their podcast to the Tamil market, to the Bhojpuri market, any of the rich regional language podcast listening populaces?
Okay, no, thank you so much. So I'll actually, because I want everybody to, at the end of this, have some stuff to take away as actionables. So I'll start with one fun fact, then I'll 3 statistics, and then 1 plea from my side, because I see coming to the end. So the fun fact, because I think we've been speaking about video podcasts a lot. I don't think a lot of people in this room actually know that podcasts actually began with video and audio podcasts. So before Apple Podcasts, Microsoft had podcasts. When it was not called podcast, it was called audio blogging. When it was called audio blogging, they created a little product called the Zune. In the Zune, podcasts had both audio and video. Then it became only audio. Now you're coming to a circle of it becoming video and audio again. So it's not that it's moving away from audio. It's just going back to what it was. First of all, that's just a little fun fact for everybody. So nobody needs to get scared about this entire situation. The second, I would say a few things, just a couple of points here are, if you want to do extremely well in regional languages as well as in English, this is the stack rank of categories. Devotion, if you're going to go in devotion, you're going to be an exceptional podcaster in terms of just sheer numbers, if that's what you're chasing. It's not what I chase, but if that's what you're chasing, phenomenal. Second one is right after devotion comes self-development, self-growth. The Indian mentality is such that people want something from the podcast. I need to take something back. It needs to be a transaction. Number 3, true crime. Number 4, romance / erotica. More erotica, less romance. Now, in terms of time, do 20 minutes. Don't go longer than 20 minutes. Post that point, your retention will start going down. Your completion rates will start going down. And my plea, all right? This is one thing that I want to sort of mention. Wherever I go, I swear to God, this is one thing that takes place. Everybody fights for their community. When you go to any of the different countries, there is a black podcaster meetup. There is a Canadian podcaster meetup. They all come together. They'll make sure that they use each other's tools. If there are creators over here, if there are products over here, I'm seriously saying be vocal for local. Go to platforms like Podmatch. Guest on other Indian podcasters. Hold up your other podcasters. Use other Indian platforms. Find platforms that are in the West that have Desi founders. There's a ton of this stuff. There are phenomenal things that people are doing over here. I would say just support one another. I swear the industry will move 5 times faster if you're collaborative over competitive. That's what I've been saying for years. I think Amit and all of these guys will attest to that.
Collaborative, fantastic. Okay, I've just been told this time only for one last question. And Murthy, you got to take that. I'm actually going to combine this into a part A and B. I just met the Avaz.com gentleman. Shini? I don't know, maybe he's out for a snack. The kind of synergy that Avaz.com, your production partner, and yourself, you discovered while creating Leading Voices, I'd like you to comment on that. And the second thing is, obviously, it'd be foolish not to ask you, given your wide expertise of traditional platforms. I mean, this is a man who straddled BFSI, banking, insurance, broking, mutual funds, all those sectors, marketed the hell out of those sectors. And what is it that podcasts have done for your brand, Murthy, that traditional media hasn't been able to do? So that's really going to be our last one.
So I think the marketer is not born when he becomes a CMO. He's born much more earlier. And I remember distinctly Shanaz Dinshaw and Anish Trivedi used to host a show on radio. And I was in love with radio at that point in time because I was the only kid in the house and this is all I had to do. And it somehow stuck with me.
That's the show I host now for the last 13 years.
There you go, Sangaran. So you know, that's where the whole thing began. And now when you become a marketer, you're sitting and saying that how can I distribute the equity of the brand across multiple formats, you know, templates which are there. I told you about Rishta. For example, we have a whole, now that I'm listening to all of you guys, we have one very nice thing for kids accounts. It says, Bachane ki shuruaat bachpan se. Now that can become a whole genre of podcast for all the young kids who are coming in, you know, and they're growing up. So this is how the whole thing happens. So it's not that you're thinking of it after you have reached a place, but you're trying to see how do I go out and leverage the medium and expand my marketing reach. The other part, and I'm just digressing a bit, but I want to speak for podcasts and for the India story per se. Okay, if you just move away from audio, video, and stuff like that, the kind of stories which are going from India, which is getting world acclaim. We just won an award at Cannes. Elephant Whisperers was there. Bahubali happened. RRR happened. If you look at the top 10 CEOs in the world, they are all from India. It's not that suddenly humko surkha pe par aa gaye aur hum log bade ho gaye. But the point is that the world wants to hear stories from India because this is the economy where people want to invest in. If I want to invest in this economy, I want to understand the culture. If I want to understand the culture, I want to know somebody from there. And these are the stories which are going to go out. When he mentioned about, I think you mentioned about the Madhubani art and stuff like that. You go down to Assam, there is a whole story around how Mekhla silk is made. And a medium like this democratizes voices of common people who are not celebrities otherwise. You know, and that's the whole opportunity which is there to go out and increase reach.
Wonderful. Please put your hands together for MVS Murthy, Federal Bank. Aditya Kuber, Idea Brew Studios. Mitesh Kothari, White Reverse Media. Gautam Raj Anand, Hubhopper. My name is Rishi K. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful conclave up ahead. Cheers.